In the late 1960s, Canada had a crazy idea: build an entirely new country inside the existing one. Not expand north into the Arctic, not colonize somewhere else, but construct a parallel civilization, a chain of new cities, highways, railways, and pipelines stretching nearly 3,000 miles across the middle of nowhere. They called it the Mid-Canada Corridor. It would cut straight across the nation's rocky heart, the Canadian Shield, that vast horseshoe of ancient rock and lakes covering almost half of Canada. Engineers drew up plans, economists ran projections, government departments studied routes and costs. For a brief moment, this was treated as a real national project, a bold attempt to build a second Canada across the empty middle of the first. And then it disappeared. No grand announcement, no cancellation, just silence. So what happened? Why did Canada abandon one of the most ambitious nation-building ideas it ever imagined? This is the forgotten story of how Canada almost built a second country and failed. To understand why Canada wanted to build the Mid-Canada Corridor, you need to understand Canada's geography. Look at a population map of Canada. See that thin line along the US border? That's where everyone lives. About 75% of Canadians live within 100 miles of the United States. The rest of the country, millions of square kilometers, is sparsely populated, with vast areas of wilderness and few permanent settlements. This isn't random. It's because of the Canadian Shield. The Shield is a massive horseshoe of ancient rock wrapping around Hudson Bay. It covers 4.8 million square kilometers, nearly half of Canada, and much of it is extremely difficult to inhabit on a large scale. The soil is thin, sometimes just centimeters deep. The bedrock is exposed everywhere. The terrain is a chaotic mess of lakes, bogs, and rocky outcrops. Winter temperatures hit -40 degrees Celsius regularly. The growing season is too short for agriculture. So for Canada's entire history, settlement happened in the south, where the climate is milder, the soil is deeper, and you can actually grow food. But by the 1960s, this created a serious problem. Canada's population was growing rapidly, from 18 million in 1960 to a projected 40 to 50 million by 2000, according to some planners. Where would all these people live? The southern strip was getting crowded. Cities like Toronto and Montreal were expanding rapidly. Farmland was being paved over for suburbs. Meanwhile, most of the northern half of the country remained largely undeveloped, with huge resource regions still inaccessible. And here's what really worried Canadian leaders: sovereignty. The Soviet Union was expanding across its own northern territories. They were building cities, military bases, and infrastructure in Siberia. Canadian politicians looked at their own empty north and worried. If we don't occupy this territory, will we lose it? Can you really claim sovereignty over land where nobody lives? There was also an economic argument. Canada was exporting raw resources, logs, ore, oil, to be processed elsewhere. Why not build processing facilities in the north and capture that value domestically? And there was a nationalist vision. Canada's centennial was approaching in 1967. The country was feeling confident, ambitious. Why not do something bold? Something that would define Canada for the next century? So in 1967, a Canadian aviator and lawyer named Richard Romer proposed something radical: build a development corridor right across the middle of Canada. Not in the far north where it's impossibly cold, not in the crowded south, right through the Canadian Shield at around the 50th to 55th parallel. He called it the Mid-Canada Development Corridor. Romer's vision was breathtaking in its ambition. The corridor would stretch from Labrador in the east to the Yukon in the west, roughly 5,000 kilometers, or about 3,100 miles. It would be 100 to 200 miles wide, creating a band of development right across the country. Within this corridor, Canada would build 20 to 30 new cities, not small towns, but real cities of 50,000 to 200,000 people each. Planned communities with modern infrastructure, universities, hospitals, cultural centers. A transcontinental highway, connecting all these new cities and linking them to the existing southern population centers. Railway lines for freight and passengers, moving resources and people across the corridor. Pipelines for oil, gas, and water, connecting resource extraction sites to processing facilities and markets. Hydroelectric dams. The Shield has massive rivers with enormous hydroelectric potential. Build dams and you could power the entire corridor. Resource processing facilities, lumber mills, smelters, refineries. Instead of exporting raw materials, process them in the corridor and export finished products. The idea was to create a parallel civilization. People wouldn't just work in the corridor, they'd live there, raise families, build communities. And it wouldn't be a frontier outpost. These would be modern cities with all the amenities of southern Canada. Schools, hospitals, shopping centers, entertainment. The economic projections were staggering. Romer estimated the corridor could create 2 to 3 million jobs, generate hundreds of billions in economic activity, open up resources worth hundreds of billions more in potential development value, establish Canada as a global resource processing powerhouse. Federal agencies and ministries reviewed the proposal, and the idea gained attention in policy circles. The Department of Energy, Mines and Resources analyzed feasibility reports prepared by private contractors. Engineers from Acres Research and Planning Limited mapped possible routes. Economists calculated costs. Urban planners designed conceptual cities. By 1970, the Mid-Canada Corridor was being seriously discussed at high levels of government and academia, and then reality set in. Because when engineers actually looked at what it would take to build this thing, they discovered something terrifying. The Canadian Shield wasn't just difficult terrain, it was an engineering nightmare that would fight them every step of the way. Let's talk about what it actually means to build on the Canadian Shield. First problem, the rock itself. The Shield is some of the oldest, hardest rock on Earth. Granite and gneiss that's been compressed and hardened over billions of years. Building roads means blasting through solid rock, not digging through soil, literally exploding granite with dynamite. A highway that might cost a few $1 million per mile in southern Canada could cost 5 to 10 times more on the Shield. And you'd need thousands of miles of highway. Second problem, the lakes. Remember, the Canadian Shield holds over 2 million lakes. You rarely travel far without crossing water. Every lake means either building a bridge or routing around it. Bridges on the Shield are expensive because you can't just drive pilings into rock. You have to drill and anchor them into solid granite. Engineers projected that building the main corridor highway would require hundreds of significant bridge structures, many costing tens of millions of dollars. Third problem, permafrost. In the northern sections of the corridor, the ground remains permanently frozen. Building on permafrost is a nightmare because it shifts as it freezes and thaws. Roads buckle, foundations crack, buildings sink. You need special engineering techniques that can raise costs 3 to 5 times higher than normal. Fourth problem, climate. Winter temperatures in much of the corridor can plunge to minus 30 degrees Celsius or lower, with construction often limited for 4 to 6 months each year. That means projects take far longer than in southern Canada, and time is money. Every extra year adds to financing and inflation costs. Fifth problem, isolation. The corridor would be hundreds of miles from existing population centers. Everything, equipment, materials, workers, food, and fuel, would have to be transported vast distances. There's no local supply chain, no nearby cities to draw workers from, no existing infrastructure to build on. You'd essentially be building from scratch in the middle of nowhere. Sixth problem, energy. Those new cities would need power, lots of it. Hydroelectric dams sound great in theory, but building them on the Shield is incredibly expensive. You're not just damming a river, you're flooding vast areas of forest and rock, displacing wildlife and affecting indigenous communities that have lived there for centuries. And here's the kicker. All these problems compound each other. High construction costs mean you need more economic activity to justify the investment. But economic activity requires population. Population requires infrastructure. Infrastructure is expensive because of geography. And round you go. The engineers started running the numbers, and the estimates were staggering. Initial analyses suggested that building the Mid-Canada corridor would cost tens of billions of dollars in the late 1960s. Some estimates later placed it between $50 and $100 billion in 1970s dollars. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $350 to $700 billion today. For comparison, the entire interstate highway system, 48,000 miles of highway across the United States, cost about $500 billion in today's dollars. The Mid-Canada corridor would have cost as much or more while serving a fraction of the infrastructure and a fraction of the population. But cost was only part of the problem. The bigger question was, would anyone actually move there? The whole plan depended on millions of people choosing to settle in newly created cities. But why would they go? In southern Canada, people had established communities and social networks, proximity to family and friends, access to universities, hospitals, and cultural amenities, mild climate, diverse job opportunities. The corridor would offer isolation from existing population centers, harsh climate with long, dark winters and limited daylight, fewer job opportunities, mostly in resource extraction, small, remote communities with limited amenities. You'd have to pay people significantly more to move there. But higher wages mean higher costs for businesses. Higher costs mean less competitiveness. Less competitiveness means fewer businesses willing to locate there. And there was another problem: automation. Resource extraction was becoming increasingly mechanized. You didn't need thousands of workers to run a modern mine or lumber operation. You needed dozens of skilled technicians. So the economic base for these new cities was shrinking even as the plan was being developed. The economists started asking uncomfortable questions. Why build new cities when existing ones still have room to grow? Why invest hundreds of billions in the shield when you could expand existing infrastructure for a fraction of the cost? Why relocate people when immigration could provide population growth in the cities already thriving? And the biggest question, who would pay for this? The federal government couldn't afford it alone. Provincial governments weren't interested in funding development outside their borders. Private companies wouldn't invest without guaranteed returns. The financial model simply didn't work. By the mid-1970s, the Mid-Canada corridor was quietly dying. There was no dramatic cancellation, no official announcement. It just stopped being discussed. Based on research, a few things happening at the time might have killed it. First, the 1973 oil crisis. Energy prices spiked, inflation soared, government budgets tightened. Suddenly, spending hundreds of billions on speculative development seemed insane. Second, environmental concerns. The 1970s saw the rise of the environmental movement. People started questioning whether massive development projects were worth the ecological cost. Building the corridor would mean flooding vast areas for hydroelectric dams, clear-cutting forests, disrupting wildlife, and potentially contaminating thousands of lakes. Indigenous communities started pushing back too. Much of the proposed corridor crossed traditional territories. Why should they accept massive development that would destroy their land? Third, changing priorities. By the late 1970s, Canada's focus shifted to other issues: Quebec separatism, constitutional reform, economic recession. The ambitious nation-building vision of the 1960s gave way to more immediate concerns. Fourth, technology. Advances in transportation and communication made the corridor less necessary. You didn't need to relocate people to the resources. You could fly workers in and out. You could ship resources south for processing. You could manage operations remotely. The whole premise that you needed permanent population centers near resources was becoming obsolete. By 1980, the Mid-Canada corridor was essentially forgotten. Romer's books went out of print. The government studies gathered dust. The grand vision faded into history. Today, if you drive across Canada, you'll see what actually happened instead. Not a parallel civilization, just the same pattern of resource extraction that's existed for a century. So why did Canada's attempt to build a second country fail? It wasn't lack of vision. Richard Romer and others had a bold, ambitious plan. It wasn't lack of need. Canada truly faced growing challenges with population distribution and untapped northern resources. And it wasn't even lack of interest. The idea was seriously studied and debated at the federal level. It failed because of geography. Small resource towns scattered across the shield, fly-in, fly-out mining operations, hydroelectric dams with minimal permanent population, Indigenous communities struggling with the impacts of resource development. The Canadian Shield is too hard, too rocky, too cold, and too wet to support large-scale permanent settlement at a reasonable cost. You can extract resources from it. You can build small towns and isolated infrastructure, but you can't build a second civilization across it. The economics collapse long before the vision becomes real. Every attempt to conquer that terrain only multiplied the cost until the numbers stopped making sense. And that's the deeper lesson. Geography sets boundaries that even the most ambitious nation-building dreams can't always overcome. Canada wanted to build a second country. Geography and economics said no. Even the Soviet Union tried something similar in Siberia. They built entire industrial cities, moved millions of people north, invested fortunes. Today, many of those cities are shrinking, infrastructure's aging, and populations are drifting south again. Because you can force people to live in harsh environments for a while, but eventually, geography wins. The Mid-Canada Corridor remains one of the great what-ifs of Canadian history, a glimpse of a parallel nation that never existed. Today, Canada's population still hugs the southern border, where geography, climate, and economics all align. The shield remains largely empty, not because of neglect, but because that's where the land itself draws the line. Was the Mid-Canada Corridor a visionary idea ahead of its time, or a dream geography would never allow? Drop your thoughts in the comments and also let me know topics you will like for me to cover in future videos.